As I stood at the edge of their table, her eyes met mine wide with shock, her face pale, and she stopped laughing in the middle of her sentence. I calmly slipped the divorce decree between her plate and wine glass. "Good evening," I said in a calm yet icy tone. When her lover realized who I was, he froze and lost confidence. Comment section below before we continue the story. This was the moment when everything fell apart. Hit the notification and subscribe if you like stories like this. Bell to ensure you don't miss any updates. The restaurant's dim lighting, which reflected golden tones on the spotless white tablecloths and polished wine glasses, gave off an aura of subtle elegance. The gentle murmur of private conversations blended with the soft music. John, it was a cruel symphony emphasizing his heartache, stood at the door in his dapper suit, his face calm and stony, a clean white envelope in his hand quivering slightly, the divorce papers inside a silent testament to the storm that raged beneath his serene exterior, but his eyes, dark with unshed pain, betrayed him. Glistened in the dim light as she leaned in his direction, a cruel irony that further twisted the knife and echoed their past. Peter, assured and unaware, grinned, his hand grazing hers as if the world were theirs alone. Adam felt the weight of betrayal pressing down on his chest, making every breath he took difficult. The air was heavy and oppressive. He stepped forward, the ground shaky beneath him. With unwavering passion and shared dreams, evenings full of laughter and hands clasped tightly under warm candlelight. But as time passed, the colors faded and routine intruded like an unwanted guest, turning sincere conversations into robotic ones. Dinners became more subdued, with the sound of silverware clinking in place of once vibrant conversation. Relationship with a planned vacation and a surprise bouquet. Eva greets us with courteous but aloof smiles, her eyes often elsewhere. Eva was craving something ethereal, a spark that routine had smothered. Their idyllic union slowly fell apart thread by thread, leaving behind a fragile framework of what once was. She avoided Adam's questioning gaze, her affection reduced to fleeting gestures that felt like echoes of a distant past. Before a reluctant embrace spoke volume, Adam started to sense the unspoken truth that was hiding beneath their facade. During this brittle silence, at first the cracks had been barely noticeable. It was easy to understand why Eva sometimes stayed up late. She told him there was an art event here and a meeting with students there. Ever the trusting husband, John brushed aside the slight uneasiness that pricked his mind, but it intensified and turned into a later than she had planned. One evening her face flushed, her explanation prepared but unconvincing. She slipped past him into the kitchen and said the gallery owner wanted to discuss a future collaboration. Adam nodded, but her tone was strained and her words lingered. Cadence strange. The phone calls followed several times. Adam had come into the room to hear Eva talking in low voices, her laughter artificial and strange. The call would cut off the instant she saw getting farther away with each call, and she would explain that she was just a student, with a wave of her hand and a strained smile that no longer reached her eyes. The scent of her coat, which he didn't recognize, and the way her phone seemed to be stuck to her hand with its constant buzzing notifications started to haunt him. She flinched once when he leaned closer and tucked her phone out of sight while they were sitting side by. As she spoke, her hands fidgeted with her bag and her eyes darted to anything but his. Adam stood in the silent hallway one rainy evening as she hurried out the door saying she was meeting a colleague and van into the rain. He was angry for the first time. Had to know the truth. JN did not hire a private investigator. After another night of evasive justification and hasty departures, he realized that trust was no longer sufficient. He needed answers. Lightly had struggled with the idea for weeks, divided between wanting to tea at him. Now the investigator, a keen-eyed woman named Anne, was efficient and discreet, he said as he opened his office door. She listened intently as Adam described the chilly atmosphere at home, the suspicious phone calls, and Eva's late-night meeting, nearly begging himself. Adam said it could be nothing and nodded, her face unreadable, but she calmly said, "If it's something, we'll find it after a few days." Lead Elena claimed to be meeting someone at a downtown cafe rather than a gallery or school. Elena's photos of Eva with another man made Adam's heart sink. They showed her leaning toward him with a smile Adam hadn't seen in years and her hand resting lightly on his. The man was tall, well-dressed and confident, but Eva had never seen his face before. Week his past was unclear. He's not just someone she's seeing. His actions rise suspicions. At their subsequent meeting, Elena revealed that HK is a skilled scammer. He has previously identified women at risk. Adam felt his chest tighten as Elena showed him the proof: of fraudulent bank account, a history of aliases and links to previous scams. That she had been charming them and taking advantage of their trust for financial gain. Eva was the perfect example of P. With sufficient wealth to be a target. The bank records sealed it. It moved Eva's money to accounts Adam didn't recognize, including large amounts that were carefully dispersed to avoid suspicion. Adam felt the treachery as a physical blow. In addition to being unfaithful, Eva had trusted a man who treated her like a paycheck to ensure their family's safety. It was a devastating realization. Eva's lies, excuses and smiles were all about their life weight of her decisions, but despite his intense rage, he was also deeply sad for the woman he had loved, once radiant with passion and joy. Eva had changed completely, becoming desperate enough to fall for Peter's false pretenses. JN knew he needed to face them both, but he would do so with deliberate precision, rather than in a fit of rage. Regaining his dignity and ending the charade that had taken over his life were more important goals. Adam stepped into his polished shoes and tapped against the marble floor, his expression composed but unreadable as he heard the muted notes of a piano, the clink of glasses, and the soft murmur of conversation. He was just another visitor, a man in a suit who might have been there for a romantic evening or a business dinner. The envelope he was holding told a different story. Eyes deliberate until they found them, Eva was leaning slightly toward Peter, her laughter light, and she looked stunning in the blue dress he had given her. As assured as ever, Peter put his hand on the table and ran his fingers over hers. Their world seemed to be confined to that tiny candid room, and their intimacy was evident. Junk's face was expressionless, but his chest tightened. The tension in the air seemed to increase as he approached. Greeted him politely, but Adam was preoccupied with the future, and his slow, deliberate steps echoed in his ears like a drum beat. Eva was in the middle of a sentence when she first noticed him. Her hand gestured enthusiastically while Peter grinned, obviously enjoying the performance, but her laughter faded as Adam got closer. Peter noticed the change and looked over his shoulder. His confident expression wavered as he met Adam's gaze. The once confident man now appeared nervous, his fingers quivering as he moved in his chair. "Good evening," Jan said in a steady, calm voice, but it was clear that he was carrying a heavy burden. Discussion going on around them. At first neither of them said anything. Eva's hands were trembling as they hovered over the table, and she stared at the envelope like it was a live grenade. Peter tried to regain his composure by leaning back, but his jaw tightened and his eyes darted between Adam and Eva, showing how uncomfortable he was. Adam was a picture of restrained power, standing tall with his hands at his sides and maintaining a steady gaze. "I believe that was compassionate but not malicious." Eva opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She tentatively touched the envelope edge as if touching it would make the truth it contained intolerable. Peter tried to break the silence by clearing his throat. "See, perhaps this isn't the place." John's eyes swung to him, piercing and unforgiving. With a voice that sliced through the air like a blade, he said, "You don't get to decide that." Peter backed, rustled as she unfolded it, his bravado slipping slightly from his face. Her face crumpled more with each line as her eyes skimmed the words. She looked up at Adam with a mix of desperation and despair as tears filled her eyes, and she blinked them back. John silenced her with a raised hand. He said firmly but softly, "D." While the diners around him were blissfully oblivious to the storm developing. "ONL. Why?" A few feet away, John asked in a chilly tone, "Do you want to explain yourself, or should I do it for you?" Jan leaned in, his calm exterior concealing the rage simmering beneath. Peter stammered, his composure cracking, "I think we should all calm down." Tears broke over her composure. Peter, who appeared to be getting more surrounded, looked toward the door as if considering a way out, but Adam remained motionless, his presence unwavering. The moment weighing heavily on him. With unsaid words finally straightened, the weight of the confrontation settling over him. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," he said in a quiet but determined tone. The tension in the air was evident as Adam spoke, his voice low, saying another word leaving a deafening silence. He looked at Eva and said, "Good evening," with purpose. He set the envelope down on the table. "You ought to read this, in my opinion." Eva's breath caught in her throat as she froze, her hands trembled as if the paper was burning, hovering uncertainly over the envelope. "Why are you here?" Her voice was hardly audible as she stammered. Her gaze shifted from Peter to Adam. A damp expression remained. Eva's fingers fumbled as she picked up the envelope. Her face lost its color as she unfolded the paper and looked over the words. She shook her head and whispered, "Now this is what I'm doing." He pointed to Peter without looking away. Eva said, "Talk like you've been talking to him." Peter straightened in his chair. After sitting in uncomfortable silence, he tried to smile without opening his eyes. "Listen," he said in an unduly informal tone, "I don't think this is the place or time for Adam." His voice was sharp, but not loud enough to attract attention from the nearby tables, so he interrupted him. "You've had plenty of time to run your lit. Falter, it's over now." Peter shifted uneasily, his confidence eroding. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, his voice tinged with defensiveness. "I don't know what you're talking about." Adam leaned forward a little, his voice falling to a cold whisper. "Would you prefer that I tell Eva about your past, the money transfers, the aliases, and the scams?" Eva's head snapped toward Peter. As he turned and left, John remained motionless, his presence imperious. As he turned his whole attention to Peter, his voice was quiet, but it had the force of a hammer against icy steel. "Your future with him," Jan said, his eyes flicking toward Eva. "It's built on lies, every dollar, every promise." It. Her breathing quickened and her gaze darted back and forth between the two men, searching for a lifeline, a shred of clarity in the chaos JK's words had unleashed. Peter tried to recover, a nervous laugh escaping him. "This is ridiculous," he said, but his voice quavered at the edges, betraying his unease. "John, you're upset." "Accusations." John raised a brow, his expression unreadable but his tone cutting. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew through a small folder onto the table, revealing snapshots of bank transfers, aliases, and prior victims. "Is this baseless? The money she wired to you, the promises you made her, or the other women you left behind when their accounts ran dry?" Eva's hands shook as she reached for the folder. "Peter tells him he's lying." Peter's confidence was evaporating like water through a SI. As he shifted uneasily in his chair, he opened his mouth, but his typical charm was gone. He could find neither word nor a witty counterargument to save himself, replaced by a glimmer of fear as he looked toward the. He whispered, "Salai, don't use her, convince her that the thousands she gave you weren't part of your plan." But Eva cut him off. Recognition slipped from her grasp and fell to the floor. She turned her tear-streaked face to Peter, her eyes wide with disbelief. Was any of it real? Peter hesitated, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find an answer, but his silence was louder than any confession. It was the only answer even needed. Adam watched her crumble, his face set, but his eyes softening for a fleeting moment. There was no glory in seeing her broken like this. Jan said, his voice quieter but still firm, but worse, you betrayed yourself. You let him manipulate, you let him turn our life into a tool for his schemes, and now he'll leave you with nothing. Eva's sobs filled the space, raw and unguarded. Her hands trembled as they reached for Adam, a silent plea for something, understanding, forgiveness, anything, but he stepped back, the distance between them both literal and symbolic. Adam's face hardened once more, his determination unwavering, meaning to reverse your actions. Eva, everything we created is coming to an end. His eyes were cold as he turned to face Peter. You'll have to deal with the consequences soon enough, he said. Adam then pivoted on his heel, leaving Peter and Eva speechless. His footsteps faded away, each one resounding with closure, while Peter's facade of confidence completely collapsed. His eyes darted around the restaurant. Seer collapsed into herself at the table, tears streaming down her face as the weight of her decisions crashed down. His fingers were fumbling with the table's edge, and his once easy stance had become rigid and uncomfortable. Only a desperate, cornered man remained after his charm was eroded by Adam's revelations and Eva's tearful incredulity. Screeched against the floor, I don't need to be involved in this. It's not my fight. Adam watched him with aloof, chilly laughter and asked, isn't this the part where you tell one of your famous stories? He crossed his arms and watched Peter stumble to his feet. Already running, Peter reassures her that everything is misunderstood. Count the 4 paragraphs I signed after reading me my rights until the word cervical pain appeared. Peter grit hands. He adjusted his jacket and his eyes briefly shifted to Eva, who sat stunned by her own sorrow, her tear-streaked face a silent reminder of the devastation he had caused. Seeing no comfort there, he turned toward the exit, his movements hurried and awkward, a far cry from the elegant manner in which he had acted before. Go ahead, Adam called after him in a contemptuous tone. As usual, run. His words are like a hammer, each syllable purposeful and relentless. As I said, he will leave you with nothing and the door. Peter paused for a moment as if he were thinking of a reply, but he said nothing and pushed the door open, disappearing into the night without looking back. Adam's stare pressed down on him like a heavy stone. Eva, one last time before saying, you see, Eva, when you gamble everything on a lie, this is all you're left with. He left, leaving Eva to deal with the emptiness Peter had left behind. Eva's voice trembled barely above a whisper as the weight of Peter's departure descended upon the table. She made a delicate, desperate gesture as she reached out to him, her hands still shaking. I was mistaken, you. She choked on her words, tears running down her cheeks. You can't just. It wasn't supposed to be this way, Eva said, her voice cracking as she went. I never intended for this to happen, and I never intended to hurt you. Any hint of softness or hope that he might give a no. She shook her head and wept. It was a mistake. I was lost. I didn't. Her voice cracked and she covered her mouth with trembling hands. I didn't know what I was doing. I let myself believe something that wasn't real, but I see it now. I see everything now. Adam's eyes narrowed slightly at the faintest flicker of something unspoken crossing his face before he straightened his posture. You see it now, he asked. I was wrong, she cried, her voice rising raw and broken. I was blind, selfish, whatever you want to call it, but I'm begging you, JN, for the sake of our family, for the sake of what we used to have, please. Adam's jaw clenched as he clenched his fists, tightening at his sides before he exhaled slowly, his voice see. With steady steps he turned and left, leaving Eva slumped in her chair, overcome by the sorrow of her loss. With his back to Eva, Adam halted as he got to the edge of the table. He appeared to pause for a moment, the burden of all that remained unsaid pressing down on him. When he turned at last, his face was no longer icy but determined, a man trying one last time to save what was most important. Eva's tear-streaked face rose. Our mistakes shouldn't cause them to suffer. Whatever you've lost, whatever you've destroyed, it's not too late to be there for them. Fix yourself, Eva, for their sake, if not for me. Adam looked at her for a moment, saying another word, leaving her with the echo of his last plea, a responsibility she could no longer ignore. As Adam left the restaurant into the crisp night air, he felt relief like a deep exhale after holding his breath for too long and a dull, persistent ache in his chest. The decision to leave felt final, but it came with a heavy price. He had loved Eva unconditionally for years. He recalled the early years of their marriage. While staying up late, he could still see how her eyes glowed when she spoke about her art, or how she laughed at his awkward attempts to dance in their small living room. Once a source of comfort, those memories now seemed far away, like looking through a frosted window at someone else's life. He had tried to cling to those moments in hopes that they would serve as a foundation for reconstruction, but tonight showed him that the foundation was insufficient to heal the rift she had caused with her betrayal. But he was only left feeling sorrow for what they had lost, sadness for the future they had once dreamed of but would never experience, and most of all sadness for their children who would now grow up in a world where their family would be forever changed. Adam stopped and looked at his reflection in the window. He looked more worn out than he had ever been, but beneath the fatigue was. Adam straightened his posture and let out a slow exhale. He was determined to go forward, even though the path ahead would not be simple, even if it meant bearing the psychological wounds of betrayal by himself. He would be there for his kids. As he drove away, the sadness faded and was replaced by a quiet resolve to start over for himself and, most importantly, for the kids. They made sure they felt safe and loved even without the life he had fought so hard to preserve. The silence in the house was nearly intolerable. Eva was sitting on the coffee table in the living room, running her fingers along the edge of a framed family photo. The photo captured a happy moment in time, with their kids laughing as they leaned into her side and Jayan grinning with his arm around her. The echo of JK's words in the restaurant, "If not for me, fix yourself for them," Eve haunted her mind as she contemplated her decisions, her desire for something different, and Peter's charm, which now felt self-serving and hollow. She had been seeking excitement, freedom, and a spark she believed had been extinguished, but in the process she had lost everything that was really important. Her guilt was heightened by the house's emptiness pressing in on her. Clutching a pillow to her chest as though it could protect her from the weight of her feelings, she sank into the worn cushions of the couch and reminisced about the times she and Adam had spent laughing over trivial things. And Eva knew she couldn't change the past, but she also knew she couldn't let it keep her immobilized. She needed to face the person she had become and figure out why she had let herself fall so far if she was going to rebuild anything for herself or her kids. The next morning, she called a therapist and explained even know where to start. I simply no longer recognize myself. Through the sessions, therapy evolved into a place for introspection and a painful but necessary mirror to her behavior. Eva cried a lot during those sessions, but each tear felt like a release, a step toward understanding and rebuilding. She started to uncover the deeper truths she had long avoided: her discontent with herself, her fear of growing older, and her mistaken belief that excitement came from. Eva apologized to him, her kids, and herself in letters she knew she would never send. She made a silent but sincere vow to do better, knowing the road ahead would be long and lonely. She felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in a long time and was determined to turn the scars from her decisions into lessons to rebuild her life during this difficult time. After the restaurant altercation with Adam's evidence in hand, Peter's life of deceit rapidly came to an end. Driven by remorse and rage, Eva informed the authorities. Peter's meticulously crafted web of lies soon started to fall apart as his deceptive actions, which included scams that preyed on weak people under different guises, caught up with him. Police found outstanding warrants connected to his prior scammers. During his arrest, in the face of growing evidence in court, the meticulously developed charm that had once deterred his victims was no longer effective. Peter tried to defend himself, as usual, spinning stories of victimization and miscommunication, but the evidence, forged documents, was too strong. Despite bank transfers and the testimony of numerous victims, the judge's decision was prompt and harsh. He was sentenced to years in prison, and the prison doors closed behind him, forcing him to finally face the consequences of his greed. Jay's life became a carefully planned routine with little time for introspection. Each day, breakfast preparation for his kids took up his mornings as they talked about their schoolwork and favorite cartoons. Two little faces lit up the kitchen table with drowsy smiles, oblivious to the burden their father bore. Adam grinned and gave his a supportive nod. At work, he threw himself into his cases with unwavering. His colleagues mistook his increased intensity for ambition, but for JN it was a shield to erase the memories of what had been lost. He didn't have much time for introspection, and every court victory was a temporary S for the suffering he harbored deep within. He spent his evenings with his kids playing board games, reading bedtime stories, and helping them with their homework. Echoed hers, or the way their daughter wrinkled her nose when focused. He refused to let his suffering overshadow his love for them, even though it was bittersweet. His children saw things differently, though they were unable to fully understand why their father appeared more reserved and solemn. He was no longer as enthusiastic about discussing weekend plans or humming songs in the car. They noticed that they were now the only three at family dinners, and Adam's fork paused in midair as he hesitated and said softly and steadily, "Mommy is busy right now, but we'll see her soon." The kids nodded in agreement and went back to eating, but Adam could still see the bewilderment in their eyes. Even though they were unable to express it, he knew they felt the change. And at night, when the house was quiet and the kids were asleep, the thug permission to be vulnerable for a few seconds. Though those moments were brief, he sat alone in the living room thinking about the life he had lost and the walls he had built to shield himself from future suffering. He didn't have time for what might have been. He had lives to raise and promises to keep. Take comfort in the internet op, and hopefully they can use it as a defense with Dana. If she wants to be that way, just post the receipts of how she asked her what to wear, etc. If she's willing to say that for a 16-year-old, or let it go, it'll pass, because I promise Dana will have some new crazy thing to do very soon. Since my original post, Dana's Facebook post, is gone. I don't know if she deleted it or enough people reported it for Facebook to remove it, but we're glad it's gone. She never apologized to us or Jane, or even called, so our position on being permanently done with Dana stands. My husband and I made a post on my Facebook addressing the lies she spew about our daughter, and we shared photo proof of Dana's text where she said, "Sent us to better," yet Dana's mother reposted it on her account, which surprised me. She wrote that they love Jane's act and that they disapprove of Dana's actions. My husband and I also made sure Jane was okay with us addressing it on Facebook, and she said it was fine. Normally, I wouldn't use Facebook to address drama aimed at me, but since this involves a grown adult attacking a minor, we felt the need to address Not years from now, I had a chance to speak with Dana's mother since my original post on the phone, and she spoke to Dana again. After our last call, Dana reiterated how she regretted asking Jane to perform, but she harped on the standing ovation that bothered her the most. Dana told her that she expected Jane to get some polite applause, but that the overwhelming response really set her over the edge because she expected the loudest cheers to be when Dana and her husband also received a great reception when they entered the reception, but Jane's performance did too. Dana didn't expect it, and even Jane was surprised since she had never received a standing ovation from a solo act before. Dana's mother believes that if Dana had asked someone to sing who had a similar reception, Dana's jealousy would have been the same. To it so long as it isn't a counselor at school because she doesn't want anyone at school or in her studio to know about the incident, and she vaguely told the coach who helped her choreograph that it went fine. We will respect her privacy request as it's her right to control the narrative, but in the same vein, I suggested therapy for Dana to Dana's mother since her reaction might be a bigger insecurity, and she said she'd ask inappropriate comment to Jane during the reception that made her shut down and not want to see friends or practice days before Dana's post. My husband asked her, and Jane said no when he did. If something happened, perhaps she'd be more comfortable telling a therapist with time, but on the bright side, she said she might want to try a different aerial studio because she doesn't want to answer questions about how it went or share a video at her home studio. Permanent leave her current studio because she has supportive friends and coaches and performs with that studio's troupe at festivals gigs. But I personally understand the need to sometimes go somewhere where nobody knows you for a break, and we hope that will help her. She hasn't said definitely yet, but if we do, we'll take her. She still wants an extended break from aerial photography. The reason she doesn't want to return to her home studio where she's a part of their troupe, she asked if we'd tell her troupe coach that she won't perform with them anymore if it comes to it, and if that's what she wants down the road, then we will. Hopefully time heals this wound and helps her at least keep the friends she has there, but we can only hope. Comments from the first doing because of one mean-spirited person. Do a nath. Yeah, it is truly weird how often on this sub we see people making excuses for outright encouraging terrible behavior. This was a welcome change. Basic bash it. Also, Oop didn't take this to an advice subreddit, but to a subreddit dedicated to the sport cake for PM. Honestly, I do think that is key. It's a very specific subject, and asking for advice from other performers. Karate and Pop-Tarts, this is the key. That story, we're a pretty small community and very protective of other aerialists, especially younger girls. It's an inclusive sport and not super competitive, which I think lends to cooler heads. Slovenly Muse, this is a hugely important underlying fact. I think these people are all family. If Dana had hired an aerialist off of Craigslist, they probably would have received polite applause that didn't upstage the bride, but Jane was family, and the young person in the family doing so well, and they're not just impressed with her performance, they're proud of her, hence the standing ovation. But this also means that when Dana lashes out at the aerialist, she's badmouthing Jane to Jane's own family. Her wedding guests will not automatically side with Dana because they're Jane's family too, and with the receipts out there, this isn't going to go well for Dana at all. I guess you could this as a lesson. I think the main takeaway here is to avoid marrying a crazy person whenever possible. Last update, when I tried to make each past post, they were immediately removed for some reason. So I asked Madison Brave to post on my behalf after a few failed attempts on my original and update posts. I was able to make a post to my own profile stating that I gave Madison permission to post on my behalf, but when I tried to add this final update, my reposted along with the many attempts on my original and update too. I started a new account and reached out to the mods for help posting my last update after Madison suggested it instead of constantly reposting it previously, and they were gracious enough to help me. This will be my last update, and I want to thank everyone who gave advice. In my last post, I mentioned that Jane said she'd be open to talking to a professional, accommodate her, but she changed her mind shortly after and said she wanted to talk to her coach, whom she had been brushing off since the reception and being vague about how it went. She and her coach put a lot of time into choreographing the act for Dana and didn't charge her for the sessions. Her coach is also part of her Circus Studi performing troupe and has always been supportive and understanding. Talked to me after her coach suggested it, and I'll be vague about some of our conversation. She also asked to talk to me before we talked to my husband, which we did. Jane told me how Dana sent a private message to her Instagram the day after the reception, but to her personal Instagram, not the circus one. Express how angry my husband and I still are. Jane said she was surprised to receive the message. Dana was always supportive of her craft and gave her a standing ovation along with her husband. Looking back, Dana probably did because everyone else was doing so, but Dana also wrote that she only received the ovation because they were family who were biased and couldn't tell a good aerialist from a bad one. Jane blocked Dana long before we spoke. Relatives who came up for Christmas early when he hosted some years back to attend her studio's Christmas recital, which surprised her, and we all went out to dinner afterward. My husband and I tried to remind her that Dana's reaction was a reflection of her insecurities, not anything Jane did. If the best man gave a speech that elicited the same reaction, Dana would have lashed out at him. confidence such as gross bodily comments. She said she may return to Ariel at some point but that she still needs time and is unsure about performing again compared to doing it leisurely. We told her we commended her decision to speak with her coach and that we'll respect her ultimate decision. Jane also said she didn't tell us immediately because she wasn't sure if she wanted more drama with Dana if we told her parents about H. She said she was surprised that Dana's parents called her out publicly on Facebook without knowing about the message, so she felt comfortable with us telling them. Jane also saved a screenshot of Dana's message, and while we agreed to tell her parents, we suggested that she delete it because it's not good to carry around hurtful things. She's also still open to speaking to a profs. That's more hurtful as long as it's not someone from her school. We're trying to find a therapist who can help with some of the infidelities that led to her shutdown in the weeks after the performance. I can't thank her coach enough. I just want to touch on a few more things suggested in the comments. I received a few DMs saying we were just as bad as Dana for addressing Dana's lies on Facebook. Drama with me on a Facebook post. I wouldn't use Facebook to address it personally, I'd call instead, but since she disparaged a minor publicly with lies about costumes we had text proof of her approving, we felt the need to post those messages proving she signed off on them, and we asked Jane if she was okay with it first. Several people asked if her costume was inappropriate, including some who used to be in Cirque du Soleil and tagged the shop while wearing it on their socials, and we've purchased other costumes from them. Some of their costumes have been used in wedding gigs by hired circus performers. Jane's costume also received many compliments, but we're glad she realizes she's not responsible for Dana's insecurities. Since, she's been in touch with her coach and is considering a different device to distract her from the temporarily tainted silks. We hope time and therapy will help her, but her coach has also suggested organizing a troop hangout outside of Ariel, like a zipline or rope course day, to get her mind off of it while seeing her friends. Dana's parents also sent Sherry's B. To thank them too. About Dana's parents, I discussed the private message with Dana's mother, and she was even more disgusted than before and said she and her husband would deal with it and that there'd be permanent changes to their relationship with Dana until she apologizes and then some. She also apologized to us on her behalf and said she didn't raise her to be like that. Other wedding-related things Dana complained about that I didn't know about. She also said she's not sure if they'll be together much longer due to other things going on, but I'll keep this to Jane only and hope she comes back to Ariel someday or even a different apparatus if she chooses. Comments from the last update. We all are love dogs. Guess I'm sorry your daughter had to deal with that horrible message on top of everything else. Support Jane through this. Honestly, Dana's behavior kind of goes beyond insecure and mean and into completely inexplicably evil territory. Not that you owe Dana anything, but especially if she was previously kind and supportive to your daughter. Dana's parents should definitely look into getting her some professional help too if there's been no indication at all of her being this cruel, out of control previously, and it's seeming out of character to everyone who knows. Experiencing a real psychiatric problem is not your fault or an excuse, but it's something that those who care about her may want to consider. Thank you for watching. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated on more.